All right. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. Again, I'm sorry I'm not there with you right now. Hopefully you can be understanding my reasons for not being there. We are very close to the exam, though, and there are only 3 major topics left in the syllabus. And they're pretty straightforward, and unfortunately they're also really juicy. And they're also the topics that a lot of people spend their time and money trying to understand and figure out. Unfortunately, given what the AP suggests and the time that we have, we're not going to dive very deep. The first of these is economic growth and productivity. Then we also have fiscal policy and then monetary policy. So fiscal policy is what the government does, and monetary policy is what the central bank does. But hopefully you'll get an introduction to this, and then if you're interested, I would definitely encourage you to follow up with me or follow up in university. And as always, what you are required to know is listed in the 0.0 file, as well as the AP's course and exam description. So, economic growth is a double-edged sword. Of course, there are enormous positives. People get taken out of poverty, people enjoy comfortable lives, people have a variety of options for food, for drink, for clothing, for ways to spend their time and their money. But at the same time, economic growth is often very unequal or unequally distributed. So there are consequences, some of them intended, some of them unintended, that accompany economic growth. So as the quote, again from Shakespeare, makes clear, there are often some things that you maybe weren't anticipating that happen when you become richer. And this is Timon of Athens, which is one of his far less popular plays. There was a song, there are many songs about money and problems, but if you know the Notorious B.I.G., you can click through on the link and listen to the video on YouTube. So, quick definition. We talked a little bit about economic growth before, but essentially it can be defined 2 ways. The first way is a sustained increase in potential real GDP over time. So this is a movement, if you remember what the PPC looks like, a movement of the PPC curve outward. Alternatively, you could use the ASAD model, and you could also think about LRAS, how it's vertical at basically the same place the PPC is, limited by the level of technology, the level of productivity, the quantity and quality of factors of production. And if you are able to move that potential, move that outer limit of what you're capable of doing, then you're able to show economic growth. Another way we can define it is a sustained increase in real GDP per capita. So per capita means per person. So we take the GDP of a country and we divide by the population of the country to get per capita GDP. And if we're able to show an increase in those 2 numbers from one time period to the next, we can say that growth has taken place. So as intimated or as suggested at the top, why should we grow in the first place? Generally speaking, there's greater prosperity. There's more money, there's more opportunity, there's more comfort. And for most people, this is a good thing. We tend and we prefer, most of us, to be richer rather than poorer. We tend, most of us, to have more options rather than fewer. And again, this isn't true for all people, but it's true for the majority of people. So growing, increasing our real GDP per capita, helps to facilitate all this additional stuff, all these additional goods and services, this improvement in quality of life for people. Scarcity, which is always and everywhere, for people with tons of money versus, and even people with very little money at all, which is the obvious case for scarcity. Productivity and economic growth help to reduce that for most people. The scarcity still exists, but it's less obvious. It's less in your face. And it only comes up in more limited circumstances that you notice from day to day. And then again, it's general well-being. People enjoy their lives more. They're not dying early of some preventable disease. They have enough food to eat. They don't go hungry at night. There's no need to necessarily engage in crime to support your life or support your family. There are opportunities greater than there would be otherwise. So one thing that I want to mention, it's not on the AP exam, there is something called the rule of 70. Alternatively, you could use 71 or 72, but it's a heuristic, a shortcut to figure out how long it takes for something to double, usually a number to double. So it helps you to figure out how long would it take for GDP to double. So you would just take 70, and let's say that the growth rate is 7% per year. 70 divided by 7 equals 10. So if an economy was growing at 7% per year, they would be able to double the size of the economy in 10 years. And this just helps you to understand how, one, growth rates or interest rates compound over time, and you can get a very large number from a smaller number applied consistently throughout time. But it's also used by a lot of people to figure out, how much economic opportunity, how much growth, how much productivity improvement might we see in particular economies. And again, not on the AP exam, but something that's helpful in your own lives to kind of figure out how long it takes for something to double in size or in quantity. Generally speaking, the growth has been a positive story for humanity. If you look at this diagram that kind of, not characterizes, that chronicles GDP per capita in England. Of course, in the early days, 1270 and such, they had to make estimates. But from 1270 to basically the current day, it's very flat for very long. We hit the Industrial Revolution, and then it goes exponential. And if, of course, you're living in any one of these small periods, it's not going to be as comfortable. It's probably going to be a little bit bumpy. There's probably going to be periods of social upheaval, social unrest. People will be dying. People will be probably experiencing incredible hardship. But overall, if you take a long view, a wider perspective, the story of human progress has generally been up and to the right. So growth as well. And GDP per capita is typically increased across countries across time. So this is, again, European economies, 1300, 1800. You'll notice that there are a lot of ups and downs with these lines. So over time, the trend is up and to the right. But for any individual lifetime, you could, depending on where you are and when you are, experience very different quality of experience. So again, our experience and your experience for the rest of your life will be very different than if you had lived in 1300 or 1400 or 1500. Of course, you know that, but it's also useful to know that over time, generally speaking, absent, aliens or nuclear holocaust or war, anything like that, we've been very lucky as a humanity to generally increase our quality of living, increase our GDP per capita. You'll also see in this, the United States is the top yellow line, so they have got there earlier, so higher GDP per capita in the United States for longer periods of time, but other countries have caught up. So even though a country started poorer, they are able to grow over time and grow closer to the U.S.'s GDP per capita number. So you can particularly note China and El Salvador. So China is the red line, second from the bottom. El Salvador is the bottom blue line, both of which experienced very significant increases in GDP per capita. So they're growing very rapidly. And if you look just a little bit higher, Thailand is the line in green. So Thailand has also been a beneficiary of globalization and has experienced significant growth over the 20th century. Other ways to think about growth or think about changes in quality of life. In the top left, we have extreme poverty. So the people living in extreme poverty is represented by the red. You can see it drops off over time. Basic education has increased for most people in most places. Literacy, as a function of education, has also increased in most places for most people. Democracy, which there's more of an argument here about whether it actually contributes to economic growth, and we can talk about that. But democracy has increased in a number of places over time. Vaccinations, despite the anti-vaxxer crowd, vaccinations typically extend human life. They typically help you to avoid terrible diseases that are preventable. And thankfully for most people, vaccination has increased over time significantly. And then the last one, child mortality, the bottom right. Child mortality has decreased over time. To lose a child, many novels, many experiences have chronicled is a terrible, terrible thing and very difficult to countenance and to get past your grief for. But child mortality has declined over time, meaning more children survive, which means population grows, and then, again, the economies grow as a result. So typically we think about conditions for growth, and the big one is we need to be willing not to consume today. So if you remember when we talked about MPC, MPS, we assume that there are two things you can do with your money or two things you can do with your time. You can consume or you can save. So in order for growth to be possible, we typically need to suspend or sacrifice, not consume today, in order to save, because we have two things that happen on our way to growth. Any guesses what they might be? So the first one would be investment, and this is gross private investment. So savings, if you remember the circular flow, become the material that firms use, or firms borrow, the capital that firms borrow to invest in capital to help grow their businesses. So savings goes into the financial system. Financial system then lends that money out to firms that want to expand. The firms use that money to buy capital, so capital, tools, machines, factories, those types of things. It can be used to make goods and services. And because they've invested in that capital, then we're able to grow. So capital you'll refer to or see as capital or capital formation. And I think it's important to remember the word capital formation. So capital formation is simply the act of investing in and creating new capital. So again, new tools, new machines, new factories, new means for producing additional goods and services.